Welcome to this session of the 2021 Blue Line Expo International. My name is Sherri Martin, and I'm the National Director of Wellness Services for the Fraternal Order of Police based in the United States. I'd like to begin by briefly introducing myself and talking about how we have made officer wellness a pillar of our work in the Fraternal Order of Police. I worked as an active law enforcement officer for 23 years in the United States, achieving the rank of lieutenant before I retired from active police work and transitioned into my current role. I add to my law enforcement service education and experience as a clinician, having worked with military clients diagnosed with PTSD and depression. I'm going to start this presentation off by sharing my screen. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is cultivating a culture of wellness in law enforcement. More and more within law enforcement, thank goodness, wellness is becoming a part of our conversation. And I'm going to talk today about some strategies that we can use within the law enforcement community to continue to keep that conversation going. Just a few brief facts to introduce the Fraternal Order of Police and our history. Until the past few decades, the FOP primarily focused on advocacy for members of law enforcement through labor and legislative action. And then it took some 85 years for the profession to accept that critical incidents had an effect on officers and our working conditions. When around 2001, the National FOP established a critical incident committee, which then later became the Officer Wellness Committee. The committee is one of many within the organization, and its members are active and retired members of law enforcement. In late 2019, the FOP took the position that it was a necessity that officer wellness become one of the pillars of our organization, much like labor and legislative advocacy had always been. I'm proud to say that we now have a division of wellness services. As a member-driven organization, we're particularly focused on the experiences not only of active officers, but also retired officers. And we've witnessed unprecedented changes and challenges to our profession over the past year. So let's dive in by taking a look at some of those. So in the past year, we started off pretty at a rolling start there with the pandemic. Huge death toll in our country and all over the world. Honestly, it brought additional precautions for us, not only in our daily lives, but moreover for us as first responders in the work that we do. Having to don extra gear, and I know a lot of our agencies started to take calls over the phone. It changed the way that we did our jobs. Some of these places began to take place for us before 2020, but the events of 2020 expedited many things. As for the most part, all of our lives changed in some form or fashion in 2020. And so looking at some of the other things that we faced after that, with the death of George Floyd, protests against law enforcement in our streets, violence in our cities, unfortunately, and then the calls for defunding, which we've seen all over our country in various forms and fashions. And, all of this has brought extra stress to law enforcement. Then there was the election turmoil, and I don't really care which side of the politics you were on. It was a stressful time for all of us. I know that, people became very opinionated about their political beliefs. It cost some of us friendships and, other stresses in our relationships. And so that was another stress piled on. And then the restrictions that we face with travel. I know prior to the pandemic beginning, I had a very busy travel schedule, and that came to a screeching halt. It changed the way that we enjoyed our lives. Going out to eat had to come to a halt. Going to concerts and, doing other things that we like to do for entertainment had to come to a halt. And so created a lot of extra stresses in our lives that we didn't ordinarily have. And so, we started to look at the pandemic as a critical incident. If we take a look at, the way that this impacted us, we were left with all of these things, uncertainty about, what exactly was going on in our lives and in our jobs, what was going on with the future. We had to change our habits, as I said, no more going out to eat, no more traveling, actually, for a while there. The way that we do our jobs, having to don extra equipment, having to, not take some calls in person and take some over the phone. But for some of us, the pandemic also provided some clarity and, what was important in our lives. I think a lot of people realized that they wanted to spend more time with family, or, wanted to do things differently from the way that they've been living, maybe slow down a little bit. And for some folks, these changes in our lives during this period of 2020 with the pandemic and all of the other changes may have created permanent changes in our lives. So, thinking about what all of these events, the impact that they had on our lives and on our lifestyle, both on and off duty. And as we think about each of these, I would suggest again that we look at the similarities between these effects, the characteristics of the changes, and conceptualize the pandemic as a sort of prolonged critical incident. Normally when we think about critical incidents, we think about things like officer-involved shootings, line of duty deaths, and things like that. But a colleague of mine looked at the pandemic as sort of a prolonged critical incident. Dr. Jacqueline Drew is a colleague, friend, and a police scholar in Australia. She's a senior lecturer at Griffith University, and we brought together Griffith University and the FOP to take a look at the effects of the pandemic by conceptualizing it as just that, a prolonged critical incident. When we compare the pandemic to other critical incidents, we also consider the following, higher than normal risk that we face during the pandemic to our safety, our health, and the uncertainty of knowing exactly, what it was, how serious it was. There were many folks in law enforcement who were both rescuer and victim who were, and in the medical profession, especially as well, trying to help those who were ill and sick, while also falling victim to the virus themselves. We higher the normal stress levels, as we've already talked about, due to all of the elevated risk, and sustained physical danger. And then finally, worries about self and family and their safety. Many of us have begun to mentally move past the pandemic now as vaccines have become more prevalent and cases are dropping. But the stress that we endured for many, many months may have taken chips out of our armor, or taken tolls in our bodies that we're still trying to catch up from. We've all have heard of long haulers, COVID long haulers, who are still suffering some of the physical effects of COVID long after having had the virus. And so, although the statistic you see in front of you is for law enforcement, it can be extrapolated to other first responder professions and may in fact be even more pronounced in other professions. This number reflects roughly a year of data. So this number I pulled from March 3rd, 2021, which is somewhere around the time that the pandemic started in 2020. For comparison, though, if this is the number of law enforcement officers we lost to COVID in a year's time, during 2020, the same period, the Officer Down Memorial page reflects roughly 100 line of duty deaths that are not COVID related, and Blue Help recorded 177 officer suicides. So the pandemic has been a significant source of stress and loss for law enforcement, and that certainly bears recognition. Let's take a look at some of the data to understand this in real time. So the FOP constantly surveys our membership. We want to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on out there in the field for law enforcement. And so in that vein, we created a survey for our membership to learn about their experiences of the pandemic, what it was like to work during the pandemic. So the figures that you see here are shown for groups who indicated that their level of stress for them and their family was high or very high to begin with. So for the bars in red, those first responders and families already rated their work stress as high or very high prior to the pandemic. Same with the red bar of family stress with the occupation. The orange bars reflect elevations in perceived stress due to the pandemic. What's of note is that those who rated their work stress high to begin with show an even greater rate of increase in stress during the pandemic. So we offered in this survey a list of 5 choices, asking what was causing the most stress. And among these were things like, increased number of calls for service, frustration over PPE, worries that they themselves would be infected. And these were the 2 highest stress issues around COVID for the officers. So our officers were more concerned about their families, bringing the virus home to their families, than they were about their own safety. Which is important to note. And we'll talk about that again in just a little bit. Some other key findings from this survey you see here. For agency leaders in the audience, we may think we're doing a good job, but are we still sending the message that mental health isn't as important to care for as physical health? We need to ask ourselves that question. In just a few minutes, I'm going to discuss some strategies for improving our response. And I want to circle back for a moment to our earlier comparison of the pandemic to other critical incidents. Although many of the respondents to the survey had not experienced the pandemic as severely as a previous critical incident, half of them had. What this means is that we have to shift our thinking of working during these unprecedented times to employ some of the strategies that we do during responses to other types of critical incidents. I'm going to shift gears for a minute and talk about a few other considerations. We faced many other challenges in our profession over the past year, calls for defunding, changes in how we're conceptualized in our society. What is law enforcement now, and what does society want us to be? There's a lot more scrutiny of our procedures, our training, and all of these are challenges to the way that we do our job and our conceptualization of that and how we're going to go in the future. And so all of these stresses together have brought upon law enforcement a kind of unprecedented storm of stressors. And so, we need to ask ourselves now what we can do to ensure that we not only survive, but thrive through this. So we've spent the first part of this talk today looking into the challenges presented to us over the past year. In the next part of the presentation, we're going to explore some strategies for moving forward and looking at where we will go from here. And so shifting gears with that, some of the recommendations that Dr. Drew and I made within the paper that I mentioned earlier, each person's going to have different experiences of challenges and will find different ways of coping. So you may have experiences within your own family or other in-group. I know that I have people within my own family, some of whom, think, not that COVID isn't a big deal, but they aren't as concerned about their safety. They take proper precautions, go out and wear a mask, wash their hands. But then I have other members in my family who have been reluctant to even leave their home during the course of the pandemic, right up until the time that they got the vaccine. So, this may cause sometimes tension, disagreement within your work groups. By the same token, we need to take a look at our own people within our police agencies and recognize that those folks might be having a harder time due to personal losses to COVID or life circumstances. After 9/11, we know that those agencies involved put some additional monitoring functions in place to attempt to track those who might have had a greater exposure so that services could be rendered to them adequately and proportionally. Just as each person will experience and cope with challenges differently, each person will display stress in different ways as well. I know that for me, during the first few days of the pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, my travel schedule, which had been pretty busy previously, it came to a screeching halt. And my husband's also in law enforcement, so he was still going out to work every day. And I felt kind of out of sorts for a few weeks, like I wasn't quite sure what to do. None of us surely knew, how big a concern the pandemic was going to be. I know at the beginning we were told 2 weeks to slow the spread, and then it dragged on and on and on. And I know that for the first couple of weeks during the pandemic, I found myself glued to the TV and watching the briefings about it, and had to find a way to refocus my efforts and my energy back to my work and kind of get out of that funk that I was in and bring myself back around. And so, everybody had a different experience when the pandemic started and what that looked like. More recently, we've learned with more research on first responder wellness, the impact and importance of families. Going back to the earlier slides that showed us what the greatest concern of our officers during the pandemic was, a concern about fear of infecting their families or partners. Another thing we know is that families are often the safe haven of support for first responders. So when there's a crisis within the family, that has the strongest impact on the first responder, especially if we consider that many of us see ourselves as healers or solvers of problems. When things impact us at work and that's carried home, it can affect our loved ones who support us as well. So I refer back to the slide about perceived increased family stress during the pandemic. This type of critical incident that we see with the pandemic is quite different from others in one key way. Although families certainly go through the experience of a critical incident with their first responder, the pandemic has actually brought elements of the critical incident into the home, which presents a completely new dynamic, something that we really had not faced before. So as individuals, as agencies, and as whole professions, we need to begin to think outside the box a little bit. So we should look towards setting up plans that do more than just check a box for this moment. While things are changing, let's dig into the change. And as we change the culture around first responder wellness, let's change our thinking from solving problems for the short term and look more at the long-term ways of caring for our first responders in our communities. Fortunately, wellness has become more of a focus in our professional culture in recent years. And so we need to keep up that momentum. It's not enough to set up wellness initiatives and find ways to include families. We need to be thinking about how we can set up solutions that will grow and evolve into the future as additional challenges continue to come. This means allocating resources if you're an agency head or leader. If it means allocating time and effort if you're an individual looking to put some of the wellness practices into your routine. We all respond differently to resources. So having just an EAP is not enough. We should be able to offer other outlets and other resources, ensuring that there's an access to trained peer support, providing crisis hotline information, and locating printed resources for personnel and their families are all other strategies that we can use. So before we move into more individualized practices for remaining resilient, let's quickly review a few key points and recommendations. These are most likely to be implemented at more of an agency level by leadership. However, there's certainly room here for individuals to put these strategies into place for families, their squads or teams, or to step up and be that leader within your organization who urges your agency leadership to take on some of these ideas. We need to develop practices of monitoring each other and constantly provide education. This is likely something that should begin in training academies. We should also not forget that onset of impacts of some of these stressors is going to occur further down the road. We know that many of the personnel who worked the aftermath of the attacks on 9/11 developed symptoms of PTSD many months after the incident. So anecdotally, one thing I've observed about police suicides is that oftentimes when we hear that an officer has taken his or her life, we're not exactly sure, you'll hear people say, well, gosh, I can't really think of anything. They just seemed fine. And if you look back in their history, somewhere there was a critical incident that might have chipped away at their armor somewhere down the line. So we need to not only be vigilant in looking after each other, but also consider things that may take a toll on us later down the road. So while we're keeping our eye on each other, that also means not being afraid to speak up. If we see something with a coworker and aren't comfortable addressing it, maybe go to a friend of that coworker, see if they're seeing the same thing. Maybe they will have a greater comfort level with addressing it. Either way, we need to do a better job of getting comfortable with these conversations. Maybe share an experience of your own to set the tone. The changing challenges of our jobs from the pandemic to the added scrutiny necessitate changes in the way that we support our personnel and each other. Let's not forget about that delayed onset I just spoke about. Remember the stories of those who went through something seemingly fine, but then sometime in the future, they begin to act out. We might say, what the heck? They got through that thing they went through with no problem. Shouldn't be hitting them now, but that's simply not what research and science shows us. Sometimes it takes some time. And you never forget, of course, that each person has a different experience and each individual's journey is different. So also, let's not forget families. This is a two-directional issue. First responder families are impacted by the work and lifestyle of their first responder. And we all know that personal relationships affect the quality of work for nearly every human being, no matter what field they're in. Families can be both the strongest support and the greatest cause of concern or worry for our first responders. So including them in planning and implementing new practices can really bolster our efforts, make them more complete at keeping everyone well. So really quickly, we know that there are many sources of stress in our lives, but these are the 5 most often cited by law enforcement. Obviously critical incident trauma. Personal variables are things like, the person's upbringing. What kind of home did they grow up in? Was it a stable home? Was it an abusive home? Things that they already come into the job with. People don't have a delete button. And so there are lots of personal variables that may come with each individual. We know that police officers are said to have a higher rate than the general population for alcohol and substance abuse. And then organizational stress, we all know, is a big one. I know a lot of police officers will tell you that the organizational stress of the politics of the job and what goes on inside the 4 walls of that police station is a lot more stressful than any of the duties that they take on as a police officer out on the street. And then finally, we also know, unfortunately, that law enforcement suffers greater hazards to their relationships, their marriages, and things like that, simply because of the lifestyle. You know, it's hard to miss important holidays. It's hard to miss birthdays. All of those things put strain on a relationship. And we all know that none of us work for great money. So, all of those things are also concerns. So well, let's get into some strategies for us to utilize as individuals. You know, as we go through times when a lot of changes are happening that we may not have control over, we need to focus on what's within our control. You know, what can you control in your own squad? What can you control in your own agency? What can you control in your own state, maybe in your own home, maybe? And take note of what makes you happy. And your happy place may not be a place per se. It may be a thing that you do, a person that you spend time with. But once you realize what that person is, or that place is, or the thing is, make note of it and visit that place as often as possible. Schedule time if you have to. Practice active scheduling. You know, and I mean not only like practice scheduling being active like exercise, I mean also like be active and proactive about scheduling things that are important to you. You know, if that's spending time with your family, put it on a calendar. We're all more likely to do things if we write it down. And then finally, one thing that we're talking about in the FOP is raising your hand. And raising your hand can mean many things. It can mean raising your hand to say, hey, you know, brother, sister, I've been there too. It can also mean raising a hand to say, hey, brother, sister, let me help you. And then finally, it can also mean raising a hand to say, I need help. I'm struggling through something. I can't do it alone. You know, I know most recently for me, I learned the power of goal setting, you know, not just, you know, thinking of goals in my mind, but actually writing them down. Sometimes writing down a goal, you know, and then taking that first step, breaking it down into smaller steps really can help you get to a better place. And then, you know, some more tips for keeping resilience going. Practicing gratitude, waking up each day and thinking of something that you appreciate in your life, writing it down, you know, whether it's one thing or two things or 10 things, and then going back at times that you're feeling discouraged and looking at the things that you're happy for in your life. You know, practicing realistic optimism. I used to say, you know, during the pandemic, this is like, you know, think about, you know, we're not going to say, oh, well, you know, COVID's going to be cured in like a week. That wouldn't be realistic. But having in mind that there will be a vaccine and people will be able to get vaccinated and we will be able to go back to normal. That's more realistic optimism, being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Realize that relationships matter not only with your partner or significant other, not only with your family, but with friends as well. Make sure that you spend some time, maintain those relationships because they'll keep you healthier, that human connection. Keep moving. And I mean, not only keep moving as far as physical activity, exercise, which we certainly encourage, but also keep moving forward. Keep thinking of ways that you can improve the world around you, things that you know, might learn, you know, learning new things, learning a new habit, learning a new hobby, you know, learning something new about yourself or people that you care about. Sit down and have a conversation with a friend you haven't talked to in a while. You know, as we go through changes to the profession, remember to stay flexible. I like to tell a story. We recently had a wellness training event within the Fraternal Order of Police, and we offered some optional physical fitness sessions, yoga and, you know, things like that. And one of our older members had never tried yoga before. So, you know, he's retired many years now and gave yoga a try and found that he really liked it. So, you know, being flexible, I say that not, you know, only the sense of yoga, but flexible in your mindset and your ideas. Be open to new things that are going to come at us. There's going to be lots of things thrown our way, you know, about reforms and things like that. Be open to new ideas and see what we can do to take the best parts of things. But don't forget to be vocal about your needs, your perspective. Speak up and let your agency know how you feel, and agency heads, listen to how your people feel. Listen to what their needs are. You know, listen to community, you know, for those rank and file folks out there, listen to your community members. You know, we all know that everybody's not against us. We know that large segments of the population are still wholeheartedly behind us. And I think everyone is just simply looking for a better way for law enforcement. Know that it is okay to look after yourself and give yourself a break. You know, these things are all things that will keep you resilient and well during all of these. So we're going to shift gears for just a minute and talk about some of the tangible and practical things that the FOP is doing, some of the initiatives that we're doing within the Fraternal Order of Police. Our members believe that there's a gap in awareness about what it's like to do the job of law enforcement. We know this from our 2018 survey of police officers that we did within our organization. We had already begun to close that gap in awareness with webinars and conferences such as this one, where we're talking more about wellness and what it's like to actually, you know, survive the experiences of doing the job. In the survey research we conducted in 2018 and 2019, we learned that there is a sense by respondents that they've been let down by the lack of adequate awareness and efforts to properly address issues surrounding mental health. And so we've made it our mission in the FOP to continue to generate awareness of the issue. And we'll talk about some of the other things we're doing. So one goal of keeping officer wellness in the conversation is changing the narrative. We all know that there has been a stigma around mental health, not only, you know, certainly within law enforcement, but also in the general public. And in the FOP, we're working to erase that. You know, we can talk about mental injury, emotional injury is being akin to a physical injury. You know, if you break your arm, you go to the doctor and get it reset. If you break your spirit or you're having emotional injuries, why wouldn't you then go seek treatment for that as well? You know, as far as compassion fatigue and burnout, we have seen that, you know, especially for those of us that get up there in age, overuse and stress injuries to our joints, to our bones, you know, sometimes cause us difficulties. The same thing happens to us on the job when it comes to our mental and our emotional health. We can overuse that and cause too much stress. What I will say is that, you know, showing emotion and saying, you know, that you need help, that you need a hand with something makes us human. That vulnerability is what makes us human. And that vulnerability, honestly, also makes us good cops. It gives us the ability to connect with other people who might be struggling with something in their own life. You know, we all know that in law enforcement, we feel that other law enforcement officers are often our strongest support. And so let's continue to look to each other for that support, you know, support those who might be struggling with something instead of saying, you know, that that they might be weak or, you know, not able to do the job. The trials that we go through on the job and in life really are a source of strength and wisdom. I mean, think about it. If we didn't ever have tough times, how would we ever learn anything about how resilient and how strong we can be? So a couple of things about what we're doing within the FOP. We are creating a national directory of what we call culturally competent law enforcement wellness services. And that's going to be everything from individual clinicians to treatment facilities to wellness products and programs to wellness training programs, books on officer wellness. All that are geared toward wellness. And those are vetted by our National Officer Wellness Committee, and they're going to be compiled in the Approved Provider Bulletin, which we hope will be out a little bit later this year on our FOP website. We have a state wellness liaison in each state that has a state lodge in the FOP that links with our national committee to work on issues that are closer to them in their own state. Each year we have an Officer Wellness Summit, which is a 2-day training event where we invite officers to come and learn about different topics in wellness. It's, you know, a great opportunity for officers to come and learn about things that they may not already know. We teach things like how to form a peer support team, financial wellness, family wellness. So great training event there. Another thing that we started to do in 2021 in conjunction with the Wellness Summit is we have a Wellness Professionals Forum. And this is going to be a similar type training opportunity for wellness professionals working within, within the arena that, you know, may be in our Approved Provider Bulletin, that can network with each other to learn about what it's like to work with law enforcement. And then not only that, but to interact with officers that are at the Wellness Summit. We currently provide training to state and local lodges. We have some training listed on our website that state and local lodges are able to bring, everything from a 2-hour training to a 2-day training that they can come and bring to their lodges that's already geared toward wellness. And then finally, we're developing nationally standardized curriculum in law enforcement peer support in conjunction, in cooperation with the Department of Justice, the COPS office. And so Powering Peers is going to be a new model of law enforcement peer support, an updated and modern model, which is going to focus not only on critical incidents, but on those everyday stressors. And we're going to provide tools for our helping peers to, help the peers that they're working with to learn their strengths and maximize those strengths to work through not only those post-critical incident stressors, but also other things that they might be struggling with in their lives, whether that's, family issues, substance issues, financial strain, or whatever other things they're doing. And so we have a fairly robust a group of things that we're engaged in the fraternal police. I'm very excited about. We have a wellness committee of 7 that works along with me on these initiatives. And I would like to thank everyone who has viewed the session today. I hope that you've carried away some valuable tools that you'll be able to utilize in your work and in your life as a law enforcement officer. This is our contact information. We welcome you to contact us at the FOP Division of Wellness Services with any questions about our missions and our initiatives. And we wish all of you out there watching safety and wellness on the job as well. Thank you very much for joining, and have a great rest of the conference.